I hate that they say shadows no longer exist. The scene right after that is where Mallory's like,
we can't keep working in the shadows. There are no more shadows.
That makes no sense for insiders. If anything, this incident shows the shadows are even darker now.
I feel like it works both ways.
Here's where I think it's going with the movie, and this is why I don't like that line doesn't affect me as much. I think really where it's going, especially in Britain's where you have cameras everywhere and you have Big Brother looking at everything. And I think they're going from that route where it's like we have cameras everywhere in this world now. And as far as like the shadows don't exist, I think that's where they're coming from is like, it's not like we have to figure out what's going on in Brazil because guess what? We got a satellite in space. It can just look down and boom, we can find out what's going on in Brazil. I think that's where it's coming from. I get that you're saying, well, like shadows don't exist because like, of course, evil things are happening all over the world. But I think that's where, again, it's connecting back to that digital thing. Because the idea of having someone boots on the ground as a spy was also to say, oh, I got to be on the ground. Remember, like for instance, remember the scene in Tomorrow Never Dies where at the very beginning of the movie, there's all those, all the planes and stuff. And then we had the really satellite cameras and we could barely see everything. And Bond's actually like looking at the ground and he can like point out like all the people and he can actually see who's who. Well, nowadays it's like, who isn't to say, like, we don't know for a fact, but who isn't to say that, like, any of these governments have these satellites that can now, like, go, and we can see, like, physical features of people now. It's not just like, oh, it's just a body on the ground. It's like, no, I can tell that's Chucky Rance, right now. So, like, that's where I think that line's going. And so, it doesn't bother me. I get where you're saying it's more of, like, a thematic thing or, like, more of, like, a real world, like, there is terrible things that are happening in the world. I get that, but I think the movie is really leaning more into like the digital age of like we have all these crazy inventions and things that like see past those shadows. So that's where I think that
I would say
goes.
the digital age acts both as a shadow and an eye that you can't hide from.
Right.
Like they're one and the same.
My trouble is that anybody and I get it. For a movie to grapple with these ideas, they need to have characters who represent the opposing ideas. So they have M, who's like, I know some shit. And then they have Mallory and the minister of whatever, who don't understand it. But my whole thing is like, is that the way it works? Shouldn't these people in the government know that there are some threats that your average person, like, if anything, there should have been protests where people are like, this is bullshit. Because the average people out there don't know about the shadows, but anybody in government should know that there's some shit that the general public doesn't know.
We're a democracy and we're accountable to the people we're trying to defend. We can't keep working in the shadows. There are no more shadows.
When Mallory is talking about the shadows, he's talking about accountability, about not hiding the truth from the public. But it just sounds a little too naive for a man who should know better.
You should do your homework. Gareth Mallory was a lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel in Northern Ireland Hereford Regiment. Spent 3 months at the hands of the IRA.
So even though this man dealt with a terrorist organization that's still active today, he somehow claims that there are no shadows.
You don't get this, do you? Whoever's behind this, whoever's doing it, he knows us. He's one of us. He comes from the same place as Bond. The place you say doesn't exist. The shadows.
And maybe that's demanding that this movie be smarter than it is, but all the same, it's not like GoldenEye, where GoldenEye's whole thing was like, hey, dude, the Cold War just ended. Like, why don't you retire? You're old enough as it is.
One of these days, you guys are going to learn just to drop it.
Whereas with this movie, there's nothing they lay out where it indicates to me that Bond should hang up his hat and just allow Q to go off and like drone everybody. Like, we're just going to rule by drones. And they even have that scene where it's like, sometimes you need somebody to pull a trigger or not pull a trigger. The argument there is that like Q can do his thing, but at the end of the day, you need boots on the ground. And then you have these actors in the government who are like, we need to get rid of the 00 program. It's like, don't you understand that everything going on is more of a reason to expand the 00 program than it is to diminish it, versus GoldenEye, where it was like, well, now that the war's done, we can go ahead and stop, right? And that was fair.
That's where I'm saying.
But let me introduce just a quick question for you two. A quick question.
Sure.
How much of, and this isn't the MI6, I don't know MI6, but Give me some guesses. The CIA, back during the Cold War, how much of their overall budget went into the Cold War specifically, like anti-Soviet action? How much of their total budget do you think was dedicated
Probably most
to
of it.
that? Give me a number. Give me a
I don't think
percentage.
I
I have
understand
no
the
idea.
question.
But I also say this argument seems
I-
moot to me because now you're just like,
I wanna know.
You're
I
like
wanna know.
getting too much in the
No, I wanna
nitty gritty
know.
of something.
Just to illustrate a point, how much of their overall budget went into the
$400
Cold
billion.
War?
I don't know.
No, percentage.
Percentage, I would say 90%.
Okay, Nance.
So the question is, the CIA has a budget of X. How much
Yeah.
of X was spent on counter Russia Cold War stuff?
Yes.
60, 50. I don't know.
Okay, the total funds dedicated to the Cold War were 10%.
Interesting.
10%. And so when the Cold War ended, the general public was like, so we can stop all this? It's like, no.
Oh, like we can get rid of the CIA now that the Cold War's done?
Yeah, and it was like, no, not get rid of it per se, but like, can we rein it in?
Massively
And it's like,
reduce
no.
it. Yeah.
We spy on everybody. We spy on every country minus, I think it was like countries like the UK and like select countries were not spied on, but literally every other country was spied on. And so it's to say that, okay, the Cold War is over and now we can just disband and stop is kind of a joke when you understand those numbers. And that's kind of what this movie represents. And my whole point is that GoldenEye handled that theme well, whereas this movie is more like you kind of have these ignorant people in the government who suddenly want to disband MI6 and the 00 program, even though what they're dealing with is something where it's like, no, the answer is to expand the 00 program. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see why you want to diminish
But
it.
I
when
wouldn't expect every other branch of government to know everything about what MI6 has going on. That's compartmentalization. You don't want everyone knowing everything.
Yeah, that's true, but regardless, I still find it odd that we go from M being investigated
Standing in the stocks at midday. Who's antiquated now?
to, hey, let's just scrap the entire program too.
Why do we need agents? The 00 section. Isn't it all rather quaint?
It just feels like the writers shoehorning in the theme of Bond's relevancy again in case we hadn't picked it up yet. I kind of wish that minister woman had been wearing a quantum pin or a specter ring because then at least it would justify her weird bloodlust for the 00 section.
Again, I don't think this point ruins or makes the better movie.
But again, McCurdy, I'm not making a case that this movie is ruined by any of this. What I'm saying is that its themes were not completely realized. That's my biggest problem with this movie, is that it presents all these themes that people go, my God, they're so brilliant. It's so genius, but I don't think those themes are realized. And I'm having flashbacks to Secret Service, which is the same thing. It's like, here's all these fantastic themes about Bond wants to quit and Bond wants to become a family man and all this stuff, but they're not realized. And it's because of what they present in the movie.